from that point and continue that process, or are you going to turn around and realize there has to be something of a challenge and a change? Am I going to challenge myself to look at my new priorities and realize my business is going to turn around and go through some obstacles? It might be obstacles with the family, obstacles with my associates, but am I going to charge forward and continue this process and put this to work?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I think it's your favorite time of the week. I know it's my favorite time of the week, but I better be your favorite time of the week too, because if it's not, we're not having enough fun. It is Leaders Talk. I am Andrew Dupe, your intrepid host, head of communications here at Leaders Brands. And today, in the words of the great David Letterman, my next guest needs no introduction because he's been on the show before. We have with us today again Darius Ross. If you remember a little bit about Darius last time, he is one of our successful authors, and he is here today to do a little bit of a focus piece. We're going to specifically talk about his upcoming release of his book, and we're going to lead off with him telling us a little bit about it, and then we're going to show you how to get it and what you should get out of it. So, Darius, welcome. As I say, we've had you on before, so welcome back.
Pleasure. I appreciate it, Mr. DeBee.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to have, though, because we've had in the 2 years we've been on, we've only had about 3 or 4 repeat guests. So yeah, I love having you on again so that we can actually deep dive a little bit more into you. So I'm going to give you the floor to open this. Introduce to us a little bit about yourself again, just for those that might have missed the previous episode. But let's talk about your book, and let's actually talk about specifics on that. So let our audience know a little bit about that.
I am Darius Ross. My background is in real estate and business acquisitions. And the number one thing about this whole book here, this is a 35-year journey in the process of human nature, human development, and more importantly speaking, just real things that are happening with real people these days. So I called it the Mastering the TPS Blueprint. It's transforming trauma into triumph because I talk about how every single situation is based upon 3 principles: timing, precision, and synchronicity, and how they all go hand in hand, all the way down to and including military conflicts. That whether it's known or not, or whether it's understood or not, all come down to that timing thing. If you're at the right place at the right time, the precision, whether or not the battle is going to be proceeded the way it should under the right circumstances, and the synchronicity. If all things come together, it's a perfect situation. How some people like Michael Jordan were able to take advantage of not making the right baseball team, but becoming a superstar. You know, how he, case in point with Kobe Bryant and his situation. Now he same thing, and then ultimately speaking, LeBron James, who didn't take the $1 million contract, but then got a better deal. So I talk about how all these things come together, and they actually make for a perfect storm of opportunity.
Yeah. And that immediately catches my interest because, everybody that's watched this show for any length of time know that I am a bit of a historian. I used to teach history and some of those degrees on the wall back there, and my specialty was actually in Russian military history, which is kind of a weird thing to do. But it's still, there was something that I learned in that there's no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. It's something that was I don't remember exactly who said it first, but so many people said it throughout history. Probably was the first person that said it. And you just brought that into my mind of the fact that when you're trying to create something and you're trying to plan for something, you need to plan for the eventualities of what you might perceive as failure. And then find the ways to not just sit there and have that, take you down. You have to pivot and adjust. So is that kind of the point of what you're trying to get to with this?
Not only that, but I'm actually teaching folks that something as simple as if or not, this is a scenario that I'm sure some people might take it out of perspective, but I'm going to put it in perspective. The German army and the Russian front and the German army in Africa, if it were not for the fact that listened to the wrong folks, the Russian army would not have happened because that conflict was based upon the cold weather. The German soldiers were not equipped for that. So they froze out, and that's why that front got lost. And then in Africa, it was the sandstorms, minus those two. And General Rommel even told him, we can't make it here. We need to pull out before it gets too dusty. So again, the entire world would have been speaking German had it not been for those two conflicts. I mean, that's what's tricky. One little simple thing of listening. So I take into account that sometimes people just don't notice the scenarios of you're faced with an opportunity. And the question is whether or not you're smart enough to listen to all the pointers that are letting you know that opportunity has bypassed you. That's
right.
the key.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up some of those mentions of World War II, and I'm actually working on a book, and I'll leave that for another episode with someone who's talking about something similar from a business perspective. And that is, you have to keep in mind everything when you're plotting, whether it be war, business, sports, however it goes. You have to keep all the things in mind. Like the World War II example, Germans had no concept of logistics. They were great tacticians. They understood all the little things about how to fight, but they had no concept of logistics. A guy like Rommel, we call him a great general, but really he was terrible at logistics.
Right.
He liked to ignore them. And when you don't take into account everything, like something as important as that, you're leaving holes in your planning. You're leaving
Right.
holes in your destination. So tell us a little bit about, what people can do to maybe close those gaps and maybe see more things and more opportunity that they might have when they're going into business and trying to plan for the future.
It's one, being able to control your mind,
Yeah.
and the other scenario of accepting your current life, uh, being able to really strategically understand guerrilla tactics. And going back again to the military, you have to be able to, at some points in time, realize that not everything is going to go according to plan. And with that being said, you can walk into a situation. I'll go to the Viet Cong in Vietnam. Perfect example. The Americans were walking on top of them, had no idea that they were there. And this is the same thing when you're looking at job search. Okay, your job search might be something basic and simple in the beginning, but not having the realization that sometimes you got to do something a little bit more tactical, like get out and walk around. If you're looking for a job and you're saying, okay, I can't find a job, well, maybe the job is just walking around and seeing a sign posted on a signpost, but you're so busy focused on LinkedIn and looking at all the other Indeeds and so forth. But the job that you need just to get you through is right there at a restaurant or some other place, but you don't see it because you're not going to look. And that guy might be desperate for a worker, but you don't realize that because you're focused on something else.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's just it. It's man, we're gonna the military is gonna love us today. Target fixation.
That's right. That's
Old
right.
pilot. They call that was actually, it was something that pilots
Mm-hmm.
needed to learn when they were learning to become fighter pilots, is
Mm-hmm.
that you cannot get too focused on the target in front of you. You always have to watch behind you. You always have to check six, because it's that day that you got that bomber and you're just going at it, and you're like, I'm going to finish this mission.
Mm-hmm.
That day that somebody creeps up behind you and punches your ticket.
That's right.
And that's the same thing in business. I mean, that's the thing, is like, what's going to end up being a problem for you is that thing you don't see.
And to further that point, the interesting thing about it is that I talk about in the book is that sometimes most people, and this is kind of the funny thing, they never look up. And one of the things I
Right.
want to teach my clients is looking around the city. When they talk about, well, I'm going through struggles, I'm going to triumph, troubles, and all those kind of things, I say, listen, let me give you a story. Have you ever looked around any major city and you just looked up at the windows and thought to yourself, somebody owns all those windows?
Yeah.
Now, that's real estate. Okay, real basic and simple. But the bottom line of that problem is, if you're so busy indebted to everything else that's going on, you're not looking up and thinking somebody else owns those windows. So why can't I? But instead of me investing in something that is tangible, I went out and bought an $80,000 car. The same
Mhm.
down payment that guy put on that property is the same down payment that you put on an $80,000 car. It was the priorities of where you put your priorities in. You still could have been wealthy, but you missed out on the opportunity.
Right. And that's actually something, I mentioned a little bit in my book, Don't Buy the Watch, is that,
Mm-hmm.
when you're putting in investment, when you're thinking about investment, the first thing that you should think of when you're looking at funds that you're going to put towards something is, what's a practical thing that I can get that possibly will get me a return on this?
Mm-hmm.
Buying an $80,000 Rolex that's immediately $75,000 the minute you
Mm-hmm.
take it out of its case, and then it's 70,000 down to $68,000 when you put it on your wrist.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily as good of an investment as, say, a book, which is,
Right.
clearly what I would be, because that's something that you can use to build and do things with, that will actually possibly open up more avenues of revenue. And I guess it really depends on your personality of which you prefer. I mean, do you have to ask yourself, are you the kind of person that your goal is the Rolex? or are you the kind of person that the goal is to build something big enough you can have 20 Rolexes? And even really then, is that what you want to really invest in? So
Mhm.
is that kind of the thought process that you think that people should be considering when they're starting to move into business ventures and think about the ways that they're going to spend their money because they're going to have to spend money.
Well, that's why I talk about the mindset reset. Are
Okay.
you prepared for your mindset to be reset and reprogrammed around what you've learned? So often you learn the process of I'm going to get rich quick. Doesn't happen that way.
No, it never does. Yeah.
Token, the reprogramming of are you prepared to turn around and realize that there are going to be a lot of difficult challenges along the way? For every 10 steps forward, there's 8 steps backwards. So most entrepreneurs fail on the first go round because they go, okay, screw it, I'm done. I'm not going to make this work. And that becomes a problem. So are you going to turn around and take the baggage from that point and continue that process? Or are you going to turn around and realize there's be something of a challenge and a change? Am I going to challenge myself to look at my new priorities and realize my business is going to turn around and go through some obstacles? It might be obstacles with the family, obstacles with my associates, but am I going to charge forward and continue this process and put this to work?
Yeah. Yeah. And how did the idea to put this into the format of a book enter into your mind the first time?
I looked at so many failures,
Hmm.
including my own, and I
Right.
said to myself, listen, if I can actually formulate a book that will talk about the topics they talk about, like controlling your mind, accepting reprogramming, accepting your current life, getting ready to move forward, the 20 questions to assist you along the way. I looked at all the different things that were going wrong and why your mind loves mediocrity. So I looked at all these things that were my own personal challenges, that were challenges of other people, and even great entrepreneurs. But nobody was really addressing why this happens,
Hmm.
why you can't get it right, what the real problems are, why you can't get your head right. And then, most importantly speaking, one of the biggest ones was how bad do you want it? So
Yeah.
often you want it, but how bad do you want it? Are you willing to turn around and do what is necessary to get what you want to get done? That's a cliche, but that's a real one because it's like going into battle. Are you prepared to turn around and do what's necessary to make this happen at all
Right.
costs?
Yeah. That's actually that reminds me of something Tony Robbins said, that it's not that people fail to generate the money, or it's not that people fail to generate the business or anything. It's that they fail to be resourceful, is what he said, because you have to have a level of how resourceful are you willing to be. And I think, and what's interesting is, I've talked at this point to hundreds of entrepreneurs over the course of my years, probably thousands at this point. And one of the things that I've noticed is that resourcefulness area is where the most successful people were, because they always found a way that when they hit the brick wall, let's get resourceful. Let's find a way over it. Let's find a way under it. If we need to bulldoze it, we'll bulldoze it. There's a way through the wall.
That's right. I mean, even
But
a good case in point of that was the Federal Express founder when he talked about he kited a check, multi-million-dollar check, in
yeah,
order to accomplish the goal to keep the thing going. I mean,
yeah.
how many entrepreneurs are willing to go, okay, now by Monday, the bank finds out I got a problem, you know? And this is the old days when you were able to do that. These days it goes on
Oh,
so
yeah,
fast,
that
you
was not
can't do it.
good.
You can't do it these days. But that was an example of entrepreneurialism at its best. You had to be
Yeah,
smart enough to realize, okay, you're going to fall to the walls and make it happen. But that's the problem. These days, a lot of entrepreneurs think of influencers, that this is going to happen overnight. But
yeah,
nobody thinks about those moments when there was denial, there was those relatives or those friends that said you couldn't do it. There was a rejection from the various vendors. There was the credit lines that didn't get approved. There was the bankruptcies. Nobody talks about those struggles. So in
right.
order for you to be successful, it's a part of that process. That's that failure part. So I wanted to write about the failures and the successes and how they come together and the lessons that you learn from them.
Yeah. And I like it too, because they're part and parcel with each other. I mean, everybody is going to fail in business at one point or another. It's impossible to avoid it. And I think that's a mindset that especially a lot of very young entrepreneurs don't necessarily see.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the youth, I guess, clouds things a little bit, but also I think the modern day in which we're now concentrating so much on multimedia and immediate turnarounds. And we hear the story of out of 100,000 people, one person hits it big on TikTok, and then the other 99,000 people think, "Oh my gosh, I can do the same thing." But it's that idea of tactics versus logistics.
Mhm.
You can see the tactics of things. Tactics is not the hard part. But the logistics of it, I think, is where people begin to fail because they don't imagine everything they need to do that's going to actually build the infrastructure to make their plan work. They only see the plan. Do you think that that's kind of how people are seeing it, or do you think there's even more to it than that?
Oh, it's even more to it than that. And I'm making a simple phrase when I talk to clients that are coaching. I say the magical word, and I'm not sure we can say it on the show, but I say, today you have to walk out every single day and say, who's going to hook up my day today?
Yeah.
Right off the bat, because it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen today, it's going to happen 2 days later. So if you get through one day with none of that and everything goes successfully, you're doing well. But that's the same thing for entrepreneurs with success. When you get to the top of the mountain, you get to the cliffs and so forth, always remember that there's going to be something that's going to happen. I mean, I listen, he says something very funny. He goes, I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Because that's reality check. There's always going to be something that's going to
Mm.
upheaval, some turmoil, some drama, something's going to happen when you're at your best. You can expect it. So when, entrepreneurs walk around thinking to themselves, oh, I'm at the top of my game, right? There's going to be something that's called everything from the alphabet, fellas, to all the other things that are going to happen. SEZDEA, there's going to be somebody that's going to be investigating and coming up with something that's going
Yeah.
to create a problem for you. So you've got to be prepared for these things. So it's like guerrilla warfare. Expect the unexpected. That's why I became a very student of history with from Mao Zedong to Chiang Kai-shek to Che Rivera. You understand history, it repeats itself.
Right. Yeah, and of course, yeah, history has a lot of practical applications in business. I mean, people read Sun Tzu's Art of War not just for war. I think more business people read
Mm-hmm.
Sun Tzu's Art of War for business than they do for than anybody probably ever has for really military endeavor. It's got so much cross connection, which is why I find part of this conversation kind of interesting and actually try to stop myself from going too far
No,
as
no,
well,
no.
ladies and gentlemen, with with an in-depth history discussion. But no, I mean, but I think I think that's practical. I think that's why, and that's why Sun Tzu wrote what he did. That's why people write what they do, and I think that's why authorship is a good way to actually explain to people the way that uh, you can become more agile mentally. You can become the ways of thinking. But that kind of leads me to the question. So I know that there's probably people that are listening to this and saying, well, Darius, that's all well and good. I mean, I kind of understand the idea of having a helicopter view of everything and maybe being prepared, but how do I be prepared? I mean, how do I actually set myself up? I'm starting my widget company. I've got a great business plan. I think it's a great product. What do I need to do mentally to get myself prepared for this journey so that I will be able to pivot when an alphabet agency or a plant blows up or a cargo container gets stuck in the Suez, whatever happens, happens.
Having four things to think about: being able to look at the unrealistic goals, that everything's going to go perfectly,
Hmm.
being able to dive in those dark moments and say, there's going to be some dark moments, and I have to anticipate those, being able to accept your current life. And I'm going to throw a curveball in here for some folks: being able to look at your inherited problems from family curses. So often in your family, there have been family curses that prevent you from dealing with adult problems. Okay. That's a real
Hmm.
tricky one because those things that you did when a little kid, when something happened, you ran into your room, you started crying, whatever else. Now all of a sudden you got to get balls up and you got to realize, okay, this is going down. I have no choice. So you can't be the executive that buries your head in a hole when your plant just blew up. You
Right.
have to get out there on the front lines and address it. There's no such thing as PR damage control. There is, you are the damage control. You are the head. You sign on the checks. You've got to be there, be effective for those families that are affected, be effective for the media and so forth. So often, CEOs, the first call they make is to the PR people. Well, that's just
Hmm.
part of your mantra as a CEO. Learn how to deal with controversy. How do you deal with those things? Because probably when you were a kid, you were growing up as, and let somebody else handle it. Let somebody, you can't pass the buck now. Now you're on the front lines. You got to deal with these things. And that's one of the biggest things is like being able to understand determination, endurance, and adversity. Adversity is going to be the number one thing you're going to deal with because something's going to happen at all times. There's going to be some problem that you're not prepared for. and you got to go in there and the term fake it till you make it. Well, you're going to have a whole lot of faking it all of a sudden, and you got to be able to address these problems that you never thought were going to happen. You have the best factory in the world, but all of a sudden there's an electrical fire. Now what? Are you going to sit there and go, okay, let me call out my PR agency, or are you going to get there as fast as you can and start dealing with it?
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. And I also love the phrase "fake it till you make it." Some people hate that. I love it. I've always done that.
Absolutely.
I learned that skill in sixth grade when I didn't do my homework once.
That's right. That's right.
And my teacher never knew I didn't.
That's right. That's it. That's it.
But that's resourcefulness. That's what that is. That's resourcefulness. That is saying I made a mistake. Somebody made a mistake. It doesn't matter if it's my fault. It doesn't matter if it's somebody else's fault. The fact of the matter is the mistake is there. You could sit there and say, "Oh well, You can make excuses and put other people on it all you want to, but the best way to handle it is to tackle it, to address it,
Right.
to just say, okay, whether it's my mistake or somebody else's, let's just figure out the solution to what to fix on it." So I mean, yeah, is that the kind of resourcefulness that you think that would be serve somebody well in a business setting?
Absolutely. And that also goes in what I talk about in the book, the winner and loser mentality.
Right. Yeah.
Are you about the winning or losing of a situation? And what I mean by that is you may never actually win all the time, but you got to be prepared to sit around and say, okay, if this is going to be an ugly situation, how can I at least make this thing work strategically enough to whereas you come out of it in a better place? For example, I use the Tylenol situation. Tylenol turned around, and what they did, which was interesting, was that once the Tylenol went wrong, they created the tamper-proof cap.
Mhm.
Now
Yeah.
they dealt with the storm, but that created a whole other industry, which was a tamper-proof cap. It was beautiful. So now when we look at this thing, all the bottles are now tamper-proof. So that created a whole other industry for someone that thought to themselves, okay, Tylenol is going through a nightmare here, but here's an opportunity for me to create a new patent on something that's going to protect the American people. So it's everything now. It's global now. But
Mhm.
that was an example of how they stepped forward and someone in their crew said, okay, we can make this reversible. We can't fix what happened to the individuals, bless their souls, but we can make this better.
Yeah, and that's again that's resourcefulness. I mean that's the idea that when you face a disaster, don't get concentrated on the disaster. Get concentrated on what you can do to build and create. Like my favorite story of those is the Connecticut Leather Company. That
Mm-hmm.
they were building leather products. They were building buggy whips. Buggy whips was their primary thing, and as cars started coming out, buggy whips went away, and then so did a lot of other things like harnesses, saddlery, all those kind of things disappeared. So what did they do? They started making video games.
Yeah.
They changed their name to ColecoVision. It's like,
Yeah,
hey,
that's right.
working. Like, we know nothing about this, but why not? There's a
That's
big
right.
industry. Let's
That's right.
go. Yeah, and I love that story because that shows extreme resourcefulness in the face of a market with demand and a business that runs well, but it runs well doing something completely different, but that it could pivot to do that. I think that that's always been very inspirational. Um,
Well, I
so
call it the
Darius,
pivot and
yeah,
play. I call it the pivot and play. Can you pivot on it and then play the situation out?
right. Yeah, absolutely. So Darius, I mean, as we're kind of wrapping up here, what are some of the things that you? I mean, we've talked obviously about things you want the audience to take away, but what's like a golden nugget? What's something we may not have discussed that you really want the audience when they read this book to just take away from it and be able to immediately roll in and use?
One simple phrase: discipline beats motivation.
Okay.
Very simple. If you can be disciplined and focused on the goals of what you need to get done, then that beats motivation. You can be motivated to get up each day and go to work, but are you disciplined enough to perform the task once you get there?
Yeah.
Very key.
Yeah. And that's very simple, but that's probably one of the more profound things that's been said on here because you immediately, anyone that's ever been in business long enough, anyone's ever run a business can immediately see the truth in that
Mhm.
because you're right. You can be motivated absolutely all you want, but if you don't have the discipline to make it work, it's not going to work. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. So, yeah, how can we find a little bit more about you and how can we find your book? Where should our audience be looking for it?
The book can be found on Amazon, Borders, and I'm sorry, Barnes and Noble, and so forth. And they can contact me and find more about the book directly with the scan QR code at dariuswrites.com. It's
Perfect.
DARIUS Rights, Rights. com.
And all of that's going to be down below, ladies and gentlemen. And there is the book if you want to go ahead and grab it. Darius, thank you so much for this. I love having you on. We're going to have you on again and not too terribly long. Hopefully,
Definitely appreciate it.
we won't go too much into a tangent, and I'll start doing comparative muzzle velocities of World War II tank cannons. Did give a speech on that once. Not joking. Um,
Uh,
Darius, again, thank you so much. We're going to
okay.
have you. I look forward to seeing you again, and best of luck with this.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.